Thank you. Thank you so much, Carly and Gabby, and we'll hear a final song, I think, later on. Thank you very much. As we begin, I'm going to ask Auntie Karen Brown to give us a welcome to country.
I'm commonly called Auntie at Crave, so feel free to call me anything you want. We are in Gadigal country. This is one of the 29 tribes of the Eora Nation. The Eora Nation runs from the Hawkesbury River and follows it right up to the Nepean River and then down to the Georges River. And we are one of the most important tribes because we are so close to everything that started a little over 200 and something years ago. We are in the area once known as Warrain. That's what the Aboriginals called it. The welcome ceremony was usually reserved for travellers coming along the trading routes when you crossed from one tribe to another. You would sit on a creek, riverbank, etc., and you would wait to be welcomed into the next country to continue the movement. Today, we welcome someone from a very distant land. Where is she? Connie, come. Connie, on behalf of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, I bid you welcome. Welcome to our country. May you treat our country with love as we treat you with love. Peace and happiness to go with you.
Thank you, and I'm honored to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Josephine Inkpin. I'm Minister in Placement here at Pitt Street, Uniting Church. Just a couple of practicalities. You found your way in, that's good. There are 3 exits there, and there. And that's access for all abilities, we hope, through there. Similarly, there's toilets around the back. Either go down the side there and round the back, or there is more accessible toilet directly behind me to the left, and you'll find it there. I hope you enjoy this time. It's such a delight to have you with us, Connie, and everyone who's here. I'd like to thank everyone who's at Pitt Street who's helped put this together, especially the catering. You might like to say thank you to folks. And I'm going to hand over now to, I have a few different hats in my life, and one of them is being involved with Equal Voices, which is one of our LGBTQA people of faith, Christian people of faith network, which was launched here at Pitt Street Uniting Church when my predecessor was here, Margaret Mayman. And it's a huge delight to work with people across other faith groups as well, but particularly across the Christian movement. We hope it's a movement sometimes. And especially with my wonderful friend, Benjamin O, I'm going to hand over to now, who's a co-chair of Equal Voices.
Thank you, Josephine. Thank you, Karen, for welcoming us. Wasn't Gabby and Mikali amazing earlier? Can we give them another round of applause? So we come as the summation of so many that's come before us, and our elder earlier reminded us to walk gently and lovingly in this land. And so it's really important to pay respects to the elders who are with us, and also those who are not with us, to be cognizant of that, because we carry them with us. Actually, no, they carry us with them, I think. That might be a better way of thinking. So let's just be mindful of that. We are always on sacred grounds. So I also want to thank Joe and Pitt Street Uniting Church community, the wonderful technicians, the volunteers, the amazing human beings who really help give us this space. Orange, thank you for doing that. I know many people do not want to be acknowledged, but I think to have gratitude, it should be a foundation to everything that we are and do. I'm going to give you a bit of a brief rundown of what we're going to do so that you don't feel disoriented. We are soon going to be hearing from our wonderful sister and friend and comrade, Connie Tuttle, who is here visiting us. She'll be joined together with another wonderful advocate, longtime friend and advocate, Anthony Van Brown, also a wonderful book writer, an elder too for our community. And he will give a short response to some of the conversation, or some of the stories that Connie would be talking to us about A Gracious Heresy. And we'll then invite Anthony to help moderate a Q&A and a conversation that Joe and I will join them in front. And of course, our community is going to have a conversation together. We, in the Christian tradition, follow a man of conversation. Jesus was a man of conversation. All through his life, in the teachings, in the telling of the story, it's all about conversations. Even after his death, the conversations carry on. So we are here to carry on that sacred dwelling together of a conversation. Now, I'm going to invite Anthony and Connie to come forward to be with us at the front so that we might begin a bit of a conversation. Now, before that, let me, please go ahead. Take one wildly naive, deeply flawed, completely, well, this is what she wrote. I wouldn't say that. This is Connie's words. You know, in this age of populism, you have to be very careful. So, take one wildly naive, deeply flawed, completely unconventional woman and stir in God. Add to that mix that she's a lesbian, feminist, army-bred, and single mom, and what you get is an earnestly radical Christian on a mission. Her response, Connie's response to an insistent call to prophetic ministry is acutely human and terminally messy. Prone to veer off course, she wrestles angels who repeatedly return her to her trajectory. The prophetic ministry to which she is called ends up taking place in hundreds of small daily acts rather than the great act that she had hoped for. Connie Tuttle is the pastor of Circle of Grace, a small, progressive, ecumenical, feminist, Christian house church in Atlanta, Georgia. After seminary and before founding the church with a group of spiritual renegades, she directed the Atlanta Hunger Walk and later worked with the Southern Prisoners Defense Committee. She is committed to social justice and has a passion for cooking and providing hospitality. She's, of course, here today, we're very lucky, where she's going to be exploring what she's on about, A Gracious Heresy, the queer and unlikely prophetic calling. Faith Adele, author of Meeting Faith, the Forest Journals of a Black Buddhist Nun, said that her book is filled with artful description and steeped in a tumultuous social politics that forged her. The Reverend Tuttle's passionate, life-affirming story speaks truth to power. Hers has been a fully engaged life, from an idyllic childhood in France, where her exuberant appreciation for the world develops, to her youth as an army-bred in the American South. Presbyterian minister and activist Jenny Sparr says that Connie welcomes us into her personal and communal faith exploration in her book. From her childhood to adulthood, we experience her call to ministry as well as her search for her true identity, where she embraces both in the face of systemic opposition. Monica Coleman, professor at Claremont School of Theology, author of Bipolar Faith, A Black Woman's Journey with Depression and Faith, says that in A Gracious Heresy, Connie Tuttle invites readers into her story of call. More than a memoir of church and justice, A Gracious Heresy is a spiritual odyssey taking the reader on a journey past historical events. Everyone called to a life before God should read this book. So there are a few copies around, so if you're interested in that book, this is the plug, please come forward to Connie at the end, and she might even leave a little note for you. So everyone, please warmly welcome Connie.
Is this on? It is on. Thank you so much, Ben. You were reading that, and I was thinking, wow, that person sounds really fabulous. But I think that I got a lot of good press without necessarily living. I don't live up to it all the time, which is what I said. I'm deeply flawed. Thank you so much for inviting me into this space, for having me here, for listening to my story. Is that better? I think that there are ways that across cultures and across countries that our faith stories intersect. And that's what I'm hoping that we'll talk about today, although I'm also going to talk about what was kind of primarily unique in my story. So I guess let me just start with that a little bit. So the first thing is, I'm an Army brat, and I don't know if you all know what that means in the United States culture. It means that my dad was career military, and we lived all over the world. Well, I was with them in Europe, both in France and in Germany. They also had lived in Japan, but also all over the United States. So what that gave me was an introduction to many cultures that I also call home. My first home was a little tiny village in Villons-sur-Meuse, France, that still my heart wants to go there, though there was only a village of 350 people and we were the only Americans, and there's probably no one there left that remembers me, and yet there's a part of me that claims that as home. I think the other thing, other than being exposed to many cultures, is I did go to church every Sunday and oftentimes on Wednesday. But in the military, the chaplain is whoever has been stationed at your base. So our chaplain might be a Black Pentecostal minister, or a high Episcopalian, or a Lutheran, or a Methodist, or a Baptist. So not only did we get like sort of a lot of experiences, but also a lot of musical experiences. And while I'm not theologically prone to the Baptist church, there are a lot of really good hymns that I enjoyed singing. But what I got from that was this kind of through strand. What is Christianity? Well, Christianity was about God loves you and Jesus loves you, and that was kind of what I got as a kid growing up. My mother was a deeply faithful woman who also, so I'm kind of telling you why I ended up in the kind of trouble that I get into. My mother was a deeply faithful woman. I often tell the story. In her 80s, she came to live with me for the last 14 years of her life. She was very active, very still active in the church. She delivered Meals on Wheels until she was 90-something. You know, she was just a go-getter. She walked 2 miles a day, blah, blah, blah. Well, a member of Circle of Grace, who is a trans woman, had this horrific accident on her bicycle, and her hip was broken in several places, and she had to have a replacement, and then there was trouble with that. And anyway, she lived on a walk-up. And so my mom said, well, just have Marie come here and stay with me, because I'm ground level. I said, great. And so she and Marie lived together for like 3 months. And when Marie finally moved out, I said, well, so Mom, you know, she was 88. I said, how, you know, you've never said how you felt about Marie being trans. Is that something we need to talk about? And this is what my mom said. She said, my job is to love her. God will sort out anything else. And so I tell that story to say that's also the cross thread of how I experienced my faith. Was very different from, there was no hell, there was no judgment, there was no, I came out and there was no bad feelings. When I came out, I was walking down the street holding my girlfriend's hands in Columbus, Georgia, in the South in 1973. Don't do that, I don't suggest that. But I was singing in my head the doxology. Thank you, God, for letting me figure out who I am. So I know that many of my experiences are grace-filled and not common. The other thing about my dad being in the military, when I was 10 years old and we lived in Germany, my mom took me to Dachau. And Dachau, it was the first year that they had opened it up to let anyone go in. And I don't know if many of you are familiar with that, but it was a horrific concentration camp that was actually liberated on my birthday, not my birth year, but my birthday. And I was changed by that. I saw evil for the first time in my young life. And in my book I say, forever, all the questions I've had about theology, about God, about people, about right and wrong, about justice, sort of began to be formed in that moment. And my dad, in my mind, and I think for many people, that the Second World War was really a stand against evil. And that's how he perceived what his work was. And I know we all have different opinions about war, and I'm not really talking about that right now. But so I had as this guide, someone who was willing to put his life on the line for what he believed was right. And so then I kind of did my own thing. I dated some really nice women. I came out. I was gonna do theater. I was gonna write, great literature. I was gonna travel around and see the world. And then God tapped me on the shoulder. And I said, God, I've got too much really cool stuff to do. And, I really like this sex part. So if that's not something that, is going to go along with that, then I'm just going to stay where I am. Well, the tap on the shoulder ended up being a 2x4 across the back of the head. And at some point I went, okay, this call was so insistent. And and I said, but you know what you got here? I am not perfect. I'm not even particularly good. And I'm a feminist. And I'm a lesbian. And now you want me to do what? And so I had to first go to college because I had graduated from high school. I'd never been to college. And in the interim, I also had been married briefly and had a little girl. So I had to go to college. And then I had to go to seminary. And this book, a lot of it is about what happened in seminary and where the strength to be in that conversation for years happened was, I think, a lot because one of my dad, who gave me that example of you stand up, you put yourself on the line if there's something you truly believe is right and good. And my mother, who said, you got to love everybody. So my experience at Columbia Seminary in 1983 is when I first went in, was interesting. I had a mentor there who, when I first went to him and I said, Ben, I feel like I really need to apply to come to seminary. And he said, well, do you have to tell him you're a lesbian on the application? And I said, well, is there a box to check? And he said, no. And he said, but let's get you in, and then we'll work on keeping you in. And so I spent 3 years working on keeping me in and being able to meet all the requirements that were required to get a MDiv or a Master's of Divinity. I'm trying to think of how much of my story should I tell. I think after that, the church would not. They did let me graduate. That's excellent. But it's interesting. For the last year I was in seminary, every week the faculty would meet to discuss what kind of degree I would be allowed to get. And in the Presbyterian Church, it is considered, a Master's of Divinity is considered a professional degree, like an attorney, a professional degree. And you get your degree with or without the recommendation of the faculty for ordination. Well, after a year, which I don't know if you know much about church councils and committees, but they meet a lot and they don't necessarily end up saying much. But what my degree was an academic degree. And I will say this, the faculty wrote a statement and said, while we may not recommend Connie to the ministry of the Word and Sacrament, we affirm her gifts and skills for ministry. So there was a little bit of a challenge by the faculty there to the institution. I was not ordained. I no longer was a Presbyterian. They said, we are so glad to see the backside of you. And so then my job was to figure out, well, God, where are you calling me? Because you had me do this thing. Was that my call? Just to be with people and have them experience a lesbian who is, sincere in their desire to be in ministry. And my mentor once again said to me, well, Connie, walk as far as you see the light. And I've kind of been doing that ever since, and I learn a lot all the time. I immediately after seminary was the director of the Atlanta Hunger Walk, which was, as you know, it's a walk that then people get you to pay money to. And anyway, we raised money for the Atlanta Food Bank and other places that served the people who were food insecure. And then I was the administrative director of the Southern Prisoners Defense Committee, which is a public interest law firm. And what they did was they did anti-death penalty work and prison reform. Both of those things, I'm very committed to issues of hunger and issues of prison reform and certainly anti-death penalty work. But you know what I found out? I am not an administrator. That is not my gift. And I can't say that strongly enough. I'm really a pastor. And so I decided, I started putting out flyers that said, I'm going to teach a course on feminist theology and spirituality. And people signed up for it. And then after that, there were a group of folks who said, okay, we want to try to do church this way. We want to look at power structures. We want to look at language and how it's inclusive or exclusive. We want to rethink our understandings theologically about lots and lots of things. We actually want a place to grow. And so Circle of Grace was formed, and I've been the pastor now for the last 29 years there at Circle of Grace. And we've been very small, and we've gotten up to maybe 50 people in a really good time. But mostly we kind of know that we're going to grow and we're going to not grow. And our call is to be faithful and to live into community that is healthy. That is kind of where we have decided to come, that we're not looking to, and this is just us. There are many ways of being spiritual community, but we're not looking to get something that's going to last for generations. We're not looking to have a building. We're really looking to build healthy spiritual community that will allow us to continue to have many gracious heresies. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Connie. And there's lots of areas there to begin to explore, I would think, from what you've shared of your story there. I won't explore the thing about how much you love sex.
Well, isn't that a gift from God?
Well, did you want to expand on that? What was that like in seminary?
Oh, well, I actually had a partner in seminary. However, they would not let us live in seminary housing. So that was bad. I'm not sure I understand the question.
I was actually going to be avoiding the sex conversation, but that's okay. Maybe people come and ask you personally later.
You can ask me personally. I don't mind talking about it. I have no bad feelings about it. But I think what I wasn't going to deny a part of myself, that living authentically was what I needed to do to be in right relationship with God. Mm-hmm. And I did have people on different committees that I met with constantly say, why did you have to say that you're gay? You obviously have gifts for ministry. Why didn't you just keep your mouth shut? Why didn't you just lie about it? And I said, I don't know, call me a little funny, but integrity and spiritual journey seem to have a connection. Mm-hmm. And so, that was one thing that surprised me terrifically, was that I was invited to lie so that I could be ordained. I'm like, no.
The whole thing of integrity is so important, is that when you've been in situations where you are closeted sometimes, or that you don't feel any freedom to be able to, because you have shame attached and there are consequences.
Right. But sometimes I wonder if I'm a sociopath. I've never had shame attached. Mm. And I think when you have that gift, when sometimes I say, I feel like I'm slapping around in a puddle of grace. Mm-hmm. I know that most people have not had my experience, which means I need to be able to speak where others are not feeling empowered to speak. And I need to stand where others, feel too much of the shame or the self-reproach or the self-hatred. So, yeah.
That is a real gift, isn't it? Because I know many people I've worked with over the years, that has been the fundamental struggle that they've had is, and instead of having shame around who they are and around their sexuality or their gender identity, to come to a place of embracing and affirming and celebrating all those wonderful things. Yeah.
That's such a healing place for people to come to.
Yeah. 1974, you walked down the street.
73, actually.
73,
Yeah.
4 years after Stonewall.
Yeah.
In Georgia, did you say?
Yeah.
That's very progressive.
I'm not the smartest person in the world. I was just sure that the rest of the world would be delighted for me that I had found this wonderful thing in my life.
How beautiful.
Yeah, but they weren't. They were not delighted.
But how wonderful to be in a place where you felt that sense of peace and completeness, and be able to do that in that context, in that time as well. Of course, something may have been happening in New York, but wasn't happening in
It was not happening in Georgia. And when Ben read the back of my book, Wildly Naive, that wasn't an understatement.
Yeah. I have a quote here that's, we all have our favourite quotes. And I've been very conscious of people that I've worked with and in my own journey that there's a bit of a pattern regarding prophets and people that have a particular calling. And I'm going to read you this quote and then maybe get you just to reflect on, have you seen a pattern? Because there might be people here today which are actually experiencing that or have experienced that, and to give it some context and maybe some understanding. So this is from a book called The Mythology of Transgression, Homosexuality as a Metaphor, by a guy called Jamaki Highwater, who had 3 strikes against him. He was deaf, he was American Indian, and he was gay. And this is what he said: people who exist at the margins of society are very much like Alice in Wonderland. They are not required to make the tough decision to risk their lives by embarking on an adventure of self-discovery. They have already been thrust beyond the city walls that keep ordinary people at a safe distance from the unknown. For at least some outsiders, alienation has destroyed the traditional presumptions of identity and opened up the mythic hero's path to the possibility of discovery. What outsiders discover in their adventures on the other side of the looking glass is the courage to repudiate self-contempt and recognise their alienation as a precious gift of freedom from arbitrary norms that they did not make and did not sanction. At the moment a person questions the validity of the rules, the victim is no longer a victim.
I think he said it very concisely and precisely. Refusing to be a victim, though, does not mean that you won't be hurt. It just means that your internal sense of self has reached a level of strength so that you can stand in the face of the difficulty. Being prophetic is an interesting concept, and my editor said when I put the subtitle to my book is The Queer Calling of an Unlikely Prophet, she said, people are going to think you're really full of yourself, calling yourself a prophet. I said, well, then they don't know what prophets are like. And so I wrote a whole new first chapter saying, look, being prophetic is not being perfect. It is being I was going to say, and I may have to think about this, but it's being empowered by the love of God. And it also isn't just standing up and saying, y'all suck and you need to fix it. It's saying, and I love you, and I'm going to walk with you while we fix this together. That I don't think you can be prophetic if you don't love the people that you're being prophetic, making prophetic statements to. That's the hard piece, I think, once you have come to that place of being okay with who you are and feeling empowered by the love of God. It is loving people who are in many cases are doing everything in their power to undo your freedoms and your well-being and even your health. We've all kind of seen how that's worked out.
Love. Simple. Just one last thing then before I hand over to questions. Have you got them in your heads already or something you want to ask? I'm just wondering, we all face challenges and moments where you want to give up or quit and I'm just wondering, for you, was there a particular time or place which was very challenging for you and maybe your darkest hour, and how did you move through that, or did you?
Thank you for that question. And there were probably many dark hours in seminary. And I was so disappointed because I was so excited. I'm a learner. I was so excited to be there. I loved my classes. We had to do 3 kind of places where we were placed into actual ministry settings. One was a prison, one was a church, and the third was as a hospital chaplain for a semester. You had to do that. And I think, and I actually write about this, I was in an inner city hospital in Atlanta, Georgia, and we had to write, when we visited somebody, we had to write down a description of the person, the conversation, and then a theological reflection about that conversation. And I had met with this young African-American man who had sickle cell anemia and was in a great deal of pain. And so I described him. He was nude to the waist. He had this gorgeous gold chain on. He was a really attractive young man. I sat with him. He talked to me about how he thought sickle cell was how God punished people of color. So we had, I would say, a lengthy and loving conversation and lots of prayer. And then I had to present it to the group that I was there with our chaplain. And I was attacked by the other students and by my professor or the chaplain there. And I was crying. I mean, I don't know, they were projecting on me, right? Oh, you were uncomfortable being with a naked man. No, I was not uncomfortable being with a naked man. Well, you whatever. It was just a barrage of, and I left there and I was crying. And I went back to the chaplain afterwards, who was over our group. And I was crying and I was looking for someone to help me, someone to hear me, and someone to help me understand what had just happened. So I'm sitting on one side of his desk, and he's sitting on the other side looking at me. And when I stopped crying, he said, and I'm thinking he's going to give me some pastoral care here, right? No. He said, so what was your relationship with your father like? I was like, and I got up and left. I mean, first of all, I had a great relationship with my dad, but that was the opposite of what I think being faithful is toward the person who's in pain. So that was one of my darkest days. My last year of seminary, there were times that I really had to crawl out of bed to go to class because I had just been fighting for so long, and I got very, very tired, and it was hard.
Constant battle.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Connie. And
I don't want to leave us on that note, though, Anthony.
well, we're not, because I think we're going to have some other questions, aren't we? Are you guys coming up, or
Yep. So I might get there is a mic over there. One of our sisters is holding that. I might get Joe to just come up to just join the conversation, because we thought we'd kickstart the conversation. No, I think we've got here, but maybe if anyone would like to have the mic.
Thank you.
I thought that while people have gathered their thoughts, earlier when you mentioned, we are called to be faithful. That's quite the opposite sometimes people think of heresy. Because from a dogmatic sense of the word, if you come from a particularly dogmatic stream of theology, what are your thoughts about, where did the Gracious Heresy came from? How did that came to consciousness for you?
Well, I think I alluded to it a little bit in saying that having all these chaplains from so many different traditions, I had to kind of pull through what was present all the way across. And I also, so the other thing about that is that I didn't grow up with any doctrine and dogma. So there wasn't that, this is what I'm supposed to believe kind of thing. So that kind of answers your question, but so the Gracious Heresy, the way we do communion at my church is that I stand up, or whoever, but usually I'm leading the liturgy, which is such as it is. And I say, there's nothing you have to do or say or believe to be fed this holy meal. For from the beginning of time, God has fed the people. In the garden, in the wilderness, all along the way, calling people to remember who they are and to whom they belong. This is our Gracious Heresy. And so my friend Monica, who wrote one of those things on my book, said, that's got to be the title of your book, because it is nothing can separate, as Paul says, nothing can separate you from the love of God. And this table is absolutely not going to separate you from the love of God. And so that is where that Gracious Heresy began. And there have been, we have a broad bunch of people from very theological backgrounds who were challenged by that. In fact, one of our matriarchs who passed away just a few years ago, every once in a while she'd come up to me and she'd say, "Are you a Christian, Connie?" And I'd be like, okay, where does that come from? But it's that heresy that says everybody has a place at the table. Everybody belongs to God. There's nothing that makes you unacceptable to God. in the essence of who you are. And so that's where the Gracious Heresy came from.
I was just thinking earlier, you were saying that your friend was saying, asking you, the elder, are you a Christian? And the joke would be maybe, ask my neighbor.
That would be a yes.
The thing is, I suppose part of the difficulty sometimes in the Australian setting, the Australian churches setting, I mean, so much argument is still going on about who should be at the table, who shouldn't be at the table, or how can they be at the table, and that is still a conversation here, rife in the mainstream churches.
It is in the United States. I mean, I think we're an anathema. We're not common. But yes, that is the question. Who can belong? Or, as I say, who can be fed? I have come to the place where I think the other heresy is, it's not really important what you believe, it is important how you live. And I want, I've got this amazing Christos who shows me a way to live, that I strive to live in that way. I think that beliefs can, when they're rigid, cut us off from one another. When it's more important, I was reading something the other day. Somebody was talking about the Nicene Creed and some of the different creeds. Those were not like, none of those were things about how do you live as a Christian. They were a bunch of people in power trying to decide who was right. I know that's making it very simplified, but it wasn't nothing in the creed tells us how to live. It tells us what we're supposed to believe. And I don't know if any of y'all have gotten hung up on very God, a very God, begotten and not made. And I'm like, I don't even need to say that out loud. I really don't. I've taken, when we say our affirmation of faith, which is often in many churches, and in the little church I also preach at in Tallapoosa, they always had the Apostles' Creed. I believe in God the Father. I've changed that, and I take it from Romans 8:38 and 39. Nothing can separate us from the love of God, neither powers nor principalities. And that's what we say as our affirmation of faith every Sunday. They haven't gotten on to me about taking the creed out yet.
Yes. I was wondering if anyone would like to offer their thoughts and remarks on some of the conversations they have heard so far. If not, yeah. I suppose part of the deal, I suppose, if we are able to use belief, I think Richard Raw made the remark that to believe in God, it's such a to say that I believe in Jesus, it's one of the easiest thing to do, because it doesn't require any it doesn't require challenge on your part. Whereas to follow Jesus, the teachings of Jesus, now that is a whole different ball game, so to speak. So yeah, just to echo what you were saying, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you, Ben.
I suppose it's a matter of how much are you prepared to change when you see the circumstances. Samuel Rees, who was a Catholic bishop of San Cristobal, very conservative, San Cristobal in Chiapas in Mexico. He thought when he got that position, he should actually see what the people are like. He took to the back country with a donkey. He saw how poor and disadvantaged he was. He challenged society, the catechism, actually had examples of social injustice from our society right here and now. A very challenging situation in Mexico. He actually appointed women as catechists. He was so supportive of the disadvantaged Maya community that they thought, when things happened, that he was going by another name, Subcomandante Marcos, the principal spokesman of the Zapatista rebels. They only knew that he wasn't Subcomandante Marcos when he was seen at the cathedral in peace talks.
Thank you.
Can I ask a quick? 3 H's come to mind. We touched on heresy, and one of the theologians influenced me used to say, as a historian, used to say, we will get somewhere in Christianity when we've written the story of the faith from the point of view of the heretics. Not because the heretics are always right, but because they're the shadow and they're the balance and all that. And that's what I hear you saying about that's important to look at that other side of things and the humility which comes out of you very strongly, and that the call for a church to be heretical in that sense, and also more humble, because we've spent our life being a lot of the life of the church is being very arrogant. The third H, which is a bit of a trouble one, this is a question really which goes with it, and maybe they go with humility and the heresy that churches might need for the future, is about the future, is about where are we headed and where do we find hope at the moment. Where do you see things happening which might involve suffering, I guess, because we're in troubled times. But where are we headed, as people, as a planet, and what is it that your faith journey might have to encourage us on the next steps?
That's a big question for such a small person. And I don't mean physically small, but, spiritually a little smaller than that. I'm going to come at this kind of through a back door. I think that the churches are absolutely, spiritual communities are absolutely important for social change, for justice, for speaking up in the world. But I think that people feel so disenfranchised by the church. I mean, we talk about our churches are dying, because there's something that I think that we do, and this goes back to the, do you believe the right thing? So Erickson talked about, psychological development of human beings. And then James Fowler wrote this book called something of faith. Stages of Faith, yeah. I mean, and he talks about, what happens when you have full-grown adults who are kept in this 10-year-old mindset spiritually. And if we can't create communities that allow people to grow and expand to beyond doctrine and beyond being in a set of I don't want to do this because I'm going to get in trouble, but I don't want to maybe I don't want to do this because that's not the way I want to be in the world, and that's not how I'm called to be in the world as a follower in the way of Jesus. Then I'm not hopeful if we can't do that. I think that's necessary to allow people to mature spiritually in the churches as well as, in their own lives.
What also occurred to me, Joe and I was having this conversation, who we might invite as a guest moderator of this conversation to add to it, and we thought Anthony. To a certain extent, you both come from such an opposite end, if you like, in terms of your experience of gracious heresy. Anthony, your own experience of what is it like to experience being first in the center of it all, and then being totally sidelined, if you like, by who you are, if you like. And then I'm thinking of Connie, in your situation, almost intentionally wanting to love people who are suffering and wanting to go and suffer with them. Because they are very close, but they do come from very different spectrum towards something. You're both reaching towards something, but from a very different angle. I wonder whether you could speak a bit to it, Anthony.
You know, that quote from Jamaica High Water, when I first read that, I went, oh my God, that's my life. And that particular line in there, to realize that your alienation has been a precious gift of freedom from arbitrary norms you did not sanction and did yet. So, you know, that there was a time after I, left the ministry that, I was in trauma. I was, recovering from all of that stuff. And, then to have that reframed to that wasn't to destroy you. There was a higher plan, and the plan was that you would discover stuff in your alienation that you would never have experienced within the city walls, and you had to be thrown out. You had to depart from that. Yeah.
Connie, for you, what do you learn about yourself, I suppose? What do you learn about yourself in taking the risks, if you like, to do gracious heresy? What did you learn about yourself, do you think?
That's a good question. I would love to sit with it for a second, but I've learned that I'm stronger than I think I am, and sometimes I'm wiser than I think I am. And I've come to also embrace that I am deeply flawed. I get things wrong a lot, and that's okay, because that's my learning curve.
We learn to love our humanity, whereas before maybe we saw it as being, well, in some denominations and some teachings, it is always about the human nature is the evil. That's the thing that you've got to fight against. Whereas, actually, I love being a little bit weird.
Yes.
I love being a little bit strange, and I love falling, and I love getting up, and all those things. I just want to add one other thing, because of what you said before. I was really touched by about loving those people. And sometimes people wonder why I can go into certain places and have certain conversations. They can't do it there. It's too triggering for them. Do I love them? I don't allow them to impact me.
So maybe I need to say what I think love is. Love is not, to me, a warm, fuzzy feeling. I do not go in those spaces and have warm, fuzzy feelings. But I do go in those spaces and say, I'm going to have compassion for the places that you are in knots. And I'm going to want the best for you as a human being. That's what loving is to me. It is not that I like you or that I enjoy being around you, but I will have compassion for you, and I will sit with you while you try to untie your knots. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for spending your time, your very short and brief time with us here, just to have a conversation. I hope this just opens up a bit of our imagination to wander away, to dare to have heretical thoughts. I'm just thinking, coming from a really growing up in a really, really orthodox, if you like, Christian household, you're rarely given a chance to dare to wander away from what you're told, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. You know very well what is not acceptable, and with that comes with people often, because what is not acceptable is rarely things, it's often people and the reality of humanity that comes with it. And I'm thinking about the Christian faith, it's an incarnational faith. It is so bodily, so tangible, so raw. And if you want to be entirely heretical, the belief that the divine is right here, embodied, that is the heresy, isn't it?
Yes, we are. When we say we're the body of Christ, people go, oh yeah, I'm in the arm or the leg. No, we are each one embodied Christ and Christa. That's what we are called to live into. That's a tough one, but that's really the most glorious challenge and heresy of all, isn't it?
And the unlikable is just as incarnational. The divine is just residing in them too, right there. And that's the challenge. So I want you to join me to thank Connie, help me thank Anthony, and to thank the Pitt Street Uniting Church community. Anthony, thank you for leading the conversation with us. Again, I've thank you, Josephine, and the Pitt Street Uniting Church team for the logistics, the hospitality. I do want to give a plug in for Connie's book, A Gracious Heresy, which I hear from Connie, you can find it on Amazon, and they have dropped the price to something that's really accessible, so that people could have access.
It's on Kindle as well, isn't it?
The price is dropped on Kindle, yeah.
Yeah, in Kindle, that's right.
Yeah.
So ConnieTuttle.com, and of course, I can't not do a plug from Anthony Van Brown for A Life of Unlearning.com. You'll find his book there and Amazon, and of course support Anthony's work through ABBI, Abby, and do support Eco Voices by joining us through ecovoices.org.au. A plug for some of the events coming up for the coming year in our setting, with Rainbow Christians Together coming up, with Pancake Pride next year and the Mardi Gras season. Finally, before we conclude, I might invite Mikali and Gabi to bless us and send us out with some music, which they might introduce to us before we close today's event. And I'll hand the last word to Connie.
I just wanted to thank Josephine and Pitt Street Uniting, or Pitt Uniting Church. This has been such a blessing for me. Thank you so much for your hospitality, for having me. Anthony, thank you for your great questions. You all have been a blessing to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you.